Looks like we're live. Good morning, everybody. We are here at the NSF, and this morning we got our crystal ball out. We are, I think all of ours are pretty cloudy, but we're gonna give it our best shot. Nothing like starting the day with a good mantle here. Quick shout out to my GSW teammates who are locked in for this NSF conference and getting ready for a game one of the Western Conference Finals tonight. Joined by an illustrious group and excited to dive in. We've got Nanea from the NFL. We've got Chris Hibbs from Legends, Cena from FTX, Chad, NASCAR, and Mike Zavanti, known as Z, from the Detroit Pistons. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So why don't we jump in? So the task at hand that Ron has posed to us, right? He said let's get out our crystal ball, and I think I joked with each of you that if I did have a crystal ball, I might be doing something different or potentially retired already. So assuming we don't have one of those, we're gonna maybe look at trend lines, right, and then maybe do some projections. So I would say the good place to start is over the last 26 months, we have seen a complete shift in all things that we knew to be true, literally everything, right? And so I guess the question to the group is, what trends have we seen that either were created by the last 26 months or arguably accelerated over the last 26 months? And not to look backwards, right? Not to look backwards to say, what are we, what did we deal with? But rather, what has the last 26 months? What is the rear view mirror, if you will? What has that created in front of us? So as we look through the front of the front windshield, right? What can we expect? What will the next 12 months look like? I would say, sort of based on these trends. And maybe I'll start with you, Hibbs.
Yeah, I would say, and this is not like an industry trend, Mike. This is more of like a lifestyle and how that fits into work trend. So just think about 26 months, right? And again, this is a go forward discussion, but I think half of us are working from home right now. It's the way it looks. I just work a ton more. I thought of myself as a hard worker, right? I see like nodding heads. The daily routine has just changed dramatically. Now I'm trying to get back into it. We as a company are always trying to find balance between what is work from home, what is the office, what is travel. But those lines have been so blurred for me, and they still are. So I'm at home this morning, and as opposed to getting up and having your usual pre-COVID routine of getting cleaned up, getting ready to go, maybe commuting in some way, it was a cup of coffee long before the sun came up, right? And you're in your workout gear and you're working, and that day turns into a run-on day, right? It might be 16 hours where you're kind of doing that same thing. You don't have the water cooler break with colleagues. You don't have lunch with a client. Again, we're getting back to that. But I think the trend is we had a ton of urgency during a tough time like COVID for the world. We had a lot of urgency, a lot of acceleration. So as I think back on the last 26 months and what does it mean for the future, I think there's got to be a little bit of return to balance and some normalcy. For me, it's been great to like really shift it into a different gear that maybe some of us didn't know we had during that time. But there's got to be a little bit more balance. And that might just be how you interact with your colleagues and your clients and the things you do on a daily basis. But acceleration and learning how hard you can go and how fast you can go has been terrific. But how do we balance things out as we move forward? So anyway, I just think about like how our lives are different, how our work lives are different, the time we put into everything. And maybe the way we operate the last 26 months isn't entirely sustainable. There's got to be more balance in your family life and your work life. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm focused on that with my colleagues and my team and myself and my own family is how do we get back to a little bit more of that? where you've got some balance as you look forward. So I'm not sure if that's not as much a business trend necessarily,
Yeah.
but I do reflect on, what has my own personal experience been the last couple of years. And it's really different still today than it was pre-COVID, the way I just work and think and operate, the urgency and acceleration every day. So trying to find some balance across the board, work and personal, is something I'm focused on as we look to the future.
Mike, can I build off that? So I would agree with Hibbs, and I think all of us, at least all of us on this panel, have kind of grown up in the you got to work from the office or else you're not working environment, and we've had to flex here. Like my data and analytics team is completely remote. None of them live in Detroit. They live all over the country. An experiment. Thankfully, that's worked. But I think as we look at the go forward, there's things like, hey, when the team's on the road for a week, can that be a remote week for people, or can that be a couple days remote? So there is a little bit of that balance that you were talking about, Hibbs. I'd say the other thing too is the experience that we create for people has to be worthwhile, I think, to get people out. They have a lot more options now, and I think and one of those being at home with a plethora of things that they could do. So making sure that the experience that we provide people is worthwhile to get them out of their house.
Yeah, and if you all mind, I'll build on that a little bit as well. And Z, I think you were talking a little bit about the fan engagement experience, but even that employee experience. I think as folks have been so accustomed to working at home and the flexibility that the marketplace is just generally providing right now, I think there's a lot that we're going to have to bring to the table from an employer standpoint to continue to keep young talent that certainly is looking at things different ways in terms of their careers and how that's progressing and kind of what they want from the work-life balance that we never seem to achieve. And Hibbs, when you get that, please coach me up on it, because I've been searching for that for a long time.
Yeah. And
the rest of us think, that you guys only work 9 Sundays. Like you're already, how much more balance do you have? Like you work 9 days a year.
I just hope that nobody from the NFL is watching this, because I'm supposed to be in the office right now, and this is not the office. So.
I'll jump in real quick and add too. I think, and I'll bounce around a little bit, going off what everyone's talked about, the work-life balance. I mean, look, I think it's one of the number one questions we get asked now when we go to talk to people about employment, right? You start to interview people, and it's one of the first hiring questions we get is, can I work remote? Right? I mean,
Sure.
a lot of times it used to be about what's my salary, what's my benefits, and that's still there, but it's like being able to work remote is part of it. So I think that is something we're gonna have to watch is how do we manage that piece. I think a couple of little other points I would mention that we're watching. Someone mentioned about the fan experience, and I think that is going to be something to watch. I mean, fortunately for us, we've actually seen a passion for people to get back into the stands. I think people spent 2 years, and I think most sports are seeing that. People spent 2 years kind of cooped up in their house, and there's this initial surge to want to get back into a venue, right, and experience life as normal. But I think the other thing we're all having to watch, though, and be cognizant of is there's still a group of fans that are trying to figure out how comfortable they are coming back in to live events. So it's a balance there. And then the last thing I would add is, and going back to what Chris mentioned earlier, is this: how do we start to get back into the office, right? I read a story recently, and I think there was a comment where it said during the COVID break, productivity was up, but creativity was down. And this is a perfect example. I think this is a perfect example. This is a creative program that has been added, right? During this, it's an opportunity for us all to get together during this experience, but we're not talking in the hallway as much as we used to, right? And sharing ideas. So I know I'm all over the place, but that's some of the things we're seeing.
So just to chime in, we're seeing a lot of the same stuff. We're a very in-office culture at FTX. We definitely default to being in the office. That's been sort of adjusted a little bit during the pandemic stuff, but we're definitely moving back into that as well. And totally agree that we tend to get more done there, but we also have some flexibility in certain situations for remote work. That being said, the other thing that I found interesting was what Hibbs was talking about in terms of blurring of lines. We're seeing that across, from a business perspective, you're seeing traditional finance companies doing crypto things, and then crypto companies doing traditional finance things. So this type of thing is interesting. I suspect it's probably going on elsewhere too. But I just, from where we sit, we see it in kind of the financial services and crypto world. And I'd be interested to know if it's happening elsewhere, but that's what we're seeing.
So y'all hit on a bunch of right things, right? I think we're solving for a new set of expectations for internal. We're solving for a new set of expectations for our end users, right? I think one thing that stuck out to me in terms of trends that happened or accelerated, I think, is when the world we stopped moving and we started moving everything around us, right? And then all of a sudden now we're moving again, but we still expect everything on demand instantaneously at all times, right? I think the package on the front door, I think, used to just be far less. And now I think, again, we're talking about an acceleration. I'm sure your old porches look just like mine. It's just constant, right? And then, but I would say is, but the consumers, they bring those same expectations into our venues, to our events. They don't leave that at home, right? They actually, as long as I have this with me, I expect everything to be instantaneous. And I guess I just sort of pose that real quickly to say, like, that has to be playing a role in everything you guys are doing from a solve forward standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I can start things off. I mean, in the trading environment, we live in a place of milliseconds, right? So we're very much in, instantaneous, like right now, 10 seconds ago type of thing. So we're definitely seeing that. And, maybe it's unique because we're a trading company, but that sort of instant, wanting something like right now and expecting it to happen is something that, really has been constant and maybe sort of accelerating from our perspective.
I would say one thing that's kind of tied to that is the immediate gratification. We're at least here seeing a trend. Season tickets, I think, are always going to be a thing, particularly in premium. But what we're seeing is a lot more on the individual purchase, and people are okay paying a premium because they want to be able to go when they want to go. So I think that immediacy that you're talking about, Kits, has sort of been reflective in buying habits as well, where we're seeing in that 24 to 48 hour run up a lot more purchasing happening.
And I think going off like what Sina was saying, we were headed in that direction, but I think the last 2 years accelerated the pace at which we were getting there, right? We've always had the device in our hand, and it was always, we got to get there, but this accelerated it out of necessity.
True that. Why don't we switch gears a little bit? And I guess to some extent we're actually not switching gears. I would say maybe the next question I would layer on to the acceleration is this this concept of globalization, right, of sport, and it's certainly not a new thing. I guess I would argue it's a growing thing. We're just like we're moving into, and Sina sort of tapped on it, right, with crypto. We're trying to create a borderless commerce, right? We're trying to create online, offline, borderless world, right? And so as we think about, Nenea, the NFL just unlocked countries for all the teams. The NBA, we just added 7 more international partnerships per team from an allowance standpoint. Hibbs Legends is making investments globally. FTX, you by design, you're literally an international global commerce and for a trading site. And I think you and I talked about how crypto actually creates even easier, right, transaction and quicker transaction. And then obviously NASCAR, Chad, you guys already have international, but from our conversation, you guys are rethinking what international means. And then I think we're all watching the Chelsea stuff. We're seeing huge investments into global media rights. So I guess I would just sort of lay that context to say an acceleration into the globalization of sport, and how from each of your seats, sort of what are you working on? What are you most excited about? What are you what are you doing to sort of accelerate that globalization?
So I can give you one example, just an internal thing. So when we first started working with the Warriors and with Stephen Curry, it didn't take a couple of days for one of our colleagues to reach out and say, "Look, I am the biggest Stephen Curry and Warriors fan in the world. Can I get a jersey or something?" And like the passion that this fan had, this individual had, you could feel over like text messages. And this is one of our employees, and he's in China. And so I realized, okay, wait, that's interesting. I would have expected probably my default would have been somebody from the U.S. maybe would have came at me with something like that. But like right away, I mean, there's examples of people that, I mean, the passion that people have for sports is global, period. And so you either sort of have to leverage that or maybe, watch others leverage it. But I think that definitely, it feels like that's the way things are going. And, just from an internal perspective, we've had that. And then externally, of course, I mean, just the engagement that we've seen with some of the international things that we've done already with the Warriors, with Formula One, Major League Baseball, and others. We're seeing a lot of passion. Basically, there's like latent passion globally around sports. And I think just generally, I feel like people are trying to figure out how to tap into that passion.
Yeah. I would jump in, Mike, and just say kind of related to that. And if you listen to Howie and Ron talk earlier, talked about F1, of course, and we're all coming off of watching the Netflix series and then probably watching in Miami. And then you see what's happening with cricket and rugby and the things that they're doing as they come to the States. So I would say the first comment is it's a great reminder that our stuff, right, American stuff, isn't the only stuff out there. The world's a big place, and there are phenomenal sports that are really global. And some of you guys are very involved in that, and some of us are not as much. It's always fun to talk to my friends who are in cricket or know cricket and realize how big of a global sport cricket really is. And a vast majority of us, even in the business, don't really recognize that here in the States. But more like practically speaking to your question, I would say one thing that we're seeing that we're excited about within Legends, certainly there are lots of Western or American business people getting involved in global sport. And I think you run right to, American billionaires buying soccer clubs or football clubs. It's not just that, but that's kind of what we read about every day. I think the expectation as that happens is more sophisticated business, whether that's platforms around e-commerce and merchandising. We all talk about the difference of walking into a venue outside of the States and walking into a venue inside the States. There's not a lot of Chase centers over in Europe, for instance. So I would say we're getting calls about, hey, how do we help create not just a better, revenue kind of mousetrap, but how do you build a better customer experience? Again, whether it's the merchandise experience or the in-venue or the culinary experience or the sponsorship strategy. So we're watching that closely and staying close to people as there's a globalization going back and forth, really. And I, understand that maybe local fans in certain markets don't always want that. There's a lot of tradition that's very important. So how do new owners maintain that tradition and keep the fans really happy with a competitive product on the pitch or the field, yet also monetize the business in a more sophisticated fashion? And we're hopeful that we're one of those companies that can help that happen.
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit on the NASCAR side. I think it's probably safe to say most of the people that's on this panel or even on this call, because I lead our international group, and I think most people, when they think NASCAR, they probably don't think outside the U.S. We do have existing series that race in Canada, Mexico, and Europe, and so I'll talk to you a little bit about from the brand side versus the revenue side right now. But if you look at the brand side, I think we have events in Europe where we'll put 40,000 people in the stands, right? That's obviously not the 100,000 or so you'll have in the US, but it tells you, and what we see is there is a passion from the sports fans for Americana, right? And that's something that people are very intrigued about. So we see that as one. I think we look at it from the US side and say just what Chris was saying, like there's this whole additional audience out there, right? There's only 350 million people in the US. Where are you going to go find your additional fan base, right? The NBA's been ahead of this curve for many years, right? And I saw what the NFL's done with opening up markets. I think the other thing that we had discussions with internally, and again, it's kind of a little bit as cause of what happened over the last 24, 26 months is it's made us kind of look at it and say, okay, if something out of our control happens that shut down our core business in the US, are we structured to operate in other places throughout the world that allows us to continue to be successful, right? I mean, I think most of us on this call and most of us watching would have never imagined a time where the US would have just shut the doors, right? And that we couldn't get people in stadiums, we couldn't do things. And I know we had a lot of discussions because there were times where other countries were open and we weren't, right? And it made you realize that having more reach it can only be beneficial.
I think there's obviously from a league standpoint, whether it's the NAO or NASCAR or Chad, there's one approach, and the team approach is different given some of the guardrails and restrictions. I think what used to be a very long-term strategy, at least from a team perspective, where maybe you had to have a player connected to a market or something like that in order to gain traction, that's gone. The crossover of players that like other sports, that are a fan of soccer or other things, bridge that gap. Social media bridges that gap. And I think ultimately, for us at least, what we're trying to do is, can we tap into that connection to drive avidity or brand value and ultimately team valuation by doing that? So if we have a player who's a fan of or a friend of a soccer player in Europe, can we collab with that team to really do something unique and different and pull in that fan base into our ecosystem?
And from our perspective, one, I'll say it's been fantastic just to see what the success that Formula One and Premier League have had here stateside, because it kind of shows just how sport travels across borders and the potential for us to gain traction internationally. And I think from our perspective, we're certainly excited about the games that we're playing internationally, adding Germany this year, getting back to doing London 3 times, as well as Mexico. But I'm even more excited just about the kind of more boots on the ground strategy that we have with opening up the ability for clubs to go out and do deals and bid on territories. Because I think we understand, and we're understanding that the more investment that we can get internationally, like we as the league can't necessarily try to take this all on our own. The globe is a big place, so having our clubs with us as they are here on the ground in the US and really marketing to those fans and creating those engagements, with us able to come over the top with your big spectacles, our big games, our production, our distribution rights, I think is a strategy that we're hoping is going to pay off. And then also from a grassroots standpoint, I think Z, you mentioned the traction that you get when you have homegrown players. We're still trying to do that. So we're staging combines in Australia, where we're looking for what rugby players could potentially come and make an impact in the league. We just launched NFL Africa. We just stumbled upon the stat that there's a little bit over 100 players in the league currently that are either directly from the continent of Africa or first generation. So how do we get over there, for one, from a talent development standpoint, and get the athletes that you can find anywhere to be able to come and get opportunities, whether it's in collegiate or professional sports in the US? And then how do we build on top of that? How do we get flag into school systems in countries in Africa, as well as work with partners like ESPN, who has distribution rights, and Twitter to further engage and really teach our game? And we have the complication that our game isn't as easy and doesn't travel as well across borders. Like the UK, we've had tremendous success. But still, sometimes people don't necessarily understand the rules. It's a little bit about the spectacle. So the more that we can do to really get people playing the game, and that's directly correlated to fandom long term, we're certainly making investment in that.
Yeah, and I would just add one more thing to it. I think the one challenge as U.S. companies that we always have to be cognizant of, and someone just mentioned it, where they said, boots on the ground, right? Like there's a commitment when you go outside of the US. I mean, there is a commitment. You have to look at it and say, what are we doing in London, and how does that compare to how do we do it in New York? And I'm not saying they're identical, but you do have to be of the mindset that we're making a commitment to go there, and we're going to put resources behind it to go there. And it's not just to go grab the revenue and get in and get out. So that commitment has to be a big thing. I mean,
yeah, I agree with that, Chad. And some things that we've heard internationally from fans is that they don't want the watered down version either. Like you certainly have to pay attention to the nuances culturally of any market you go to. But we used to do like preseason games internationally, and that didn't go well because they want the real product. They want it to look like it does and understand the fandom that we have here domestically and have that transplanted there. They don't want something that's custom fit per se for them that's going to be drastically different from the product that you're bringing from the US.
That's a really interesting point, Linnea. This concept of quote unquote the authentic thing versus a revised version, right? That is custom, like you said, for that country, for those fans. That's actually a really interesting two sides of the equation there to think about. There was a question that popped in. The question from the audience says, regarding Z's comments, I would love to hear how everyone else is leveraging social in new ways to grow their value and reach. Are social assets becoming more valuable? And then maybe I would just sort of take that a step further and say, what does social mean, right? I mean, I think the platforms are changing, growing. So I guess the question is, are you using social in new ways as you're thinking about globalization?
I'll kick off. For us, it's really about engagement. You can grow a follower base significantly, but are people engaging with the content first and foremost? So we've made a concerted effort on that. I think there are some new frontiers. Again, kind of going back to what I said before, we all came up in a system where TV visible signage was a thing. Well, what about social media visible signage? Because that's the main conduit that people are consuming things through. So as we're trying to think about how we tell our story, how we communicate with our fans, but also ultimately how do we monetize it, strategically inserting things there versus what we traditionally have done is definitely a conversation we've had and probably something you'll see this upcoming year.
I would just add agree. The only thing I'd add on the back to social and the globalization, again, it's easy in the US to kind of follow the trends that are happening socially in the US, but what you learn very quickly is the way the consumer uses social in Mexico might be different than the way it is in Europe. So we've had to be stay on top of the fact that, Facebook might still be, although it's kind of we're trending away from there in the US and Mexico, that is a really popular way of using social. So that's the other thing too. It's if you're looking at it from the global side, we can't get too locked in what's the trending initiative here in the US and still stay relevant on each platform.
That's a great point, Chad. We have a number of folks looking at specifically that for us. So when we're going to run a campaign globally, how do you have to tailor it for this part of the world or that part of the world? But in terms of the question of the importance of social media, yeah, for us, I mean, we're pretty much a digital first company, and people interact with us mostly digitally, and so social media is a huge part of that. And we're kind of more we're more prominent on some platforms than others, and we're always looking at all the different sort of options that we have in terms of where we can go and what the story, as C was talking about, what's our story that we want to get out there on a particular thing. And what's the most effective way to do that? And we're constantly looking at it from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective.
Hey, Sina, maybe a question from me as you talk about that and you think about different platforms for different audiences. You guys are, like you said, digital and mobile first. I'm curious, do you have people within your organization that literally sit in a world that is whether it's TikTok focused or it's just that target demo focused, and their strategies and how they present your brand and engage is different from someone else who might be in the same group, but is thinking about a very different platform and different social, target?
Yeah, it's a great question. We definitely do have those folks. I would say though, it's certainly an art plus a science. I don't think anybody's figured out like the exact formula yet. If you have, please let me know. But we're always looking at ways to sort of deliver the right message at the right time for the right people in the right place, right?
Absolutely.
I think Z, you made a good point around the broadcast v social media platforms. Hibbs and Nanea threw the world's largest party in LA this year with SoFi Super Bowl, and what we saw for all of us, right? We all saw Cena and FTX and the rest of the crypto world take over the commercial, the Super Bowl commercials. But interestingly, what maybe this has been happening, but what I noticed more than ever this year, and Cena, maybe you could talk about this, is that yes, there's the 30-second spot that is the coveted in game and everybody's watching, but the amount of social media that you guys created in and around the spot before, after, during the cuts, I mean, I would assume that produced even more than engagement and viewership than even just the 700 million people that tuned in on that Sunday.
Yeah, it's a great point, Mike. And we had certainly a lot of people commenting and reaching out to us and just sort of engaging directly with that spot with Larry David there. And they loved it apparently, and it won awards and all kinds of things. But then the reverberations of that afterwards, as you pointed out, people still kind of go back to that. And I think it's, I don't know, somewhere around 50 million plus views and after the fact. And people keep talking about that as sort of like, I don't know, this thing that maybe set the bar for like crypto commercials, or it was one of the funniest commercials at the Super Bowl. And so we're certainly pleased with the outcome, and honestly, it kind of motivates us to want to do more and to try to go even bigger.
It's great news, Nanea. Wants to do more.
Yeah, I like that. And I'd also just to piggyback off the point that you're making, Mike, is just how you surround your core content with social. I think the last 3 years we've really been diving into what we're calling influencer marketing, and how you take the core NFL sport and influencers from fashion, music, gaming, and wrap them around your product and bring their fan bases with you. We're lucky to have a strong fan base here in the US, and those fans are also celebrities in some aspect. And I think you saw it from, if you were going through social posts during the Super Bowl, and how many different posts there were about all of the celebrities that were in house and all the musicians that were in house. It's just another way to engage and bring people that might not be interested in your core sport in through another lane and say, hey, why is that person there? What's going on there? That's cool. And hopefully we can keep their attention and turn them into a fan through using those outlets to bring them into the game.
Hey, Mike, I might just, I know this is a little bit off the question of social, but you just mentioned Super Bowl. And like remiss to credit, Nanea and the entire NFL. You think about future trends, and I think one thing that we saw with SoFi Stadium and LA and everything that happened is a reminder that fans and brands will pay for a otherworldly experience. Now that's hard to accomplish sometimes, right? Whether that's a physical experience or a digital experience. If you provide them something that is sensory overload and is, again, the tangible sense, the best food and beverage, the best technology, the best connectivity, obviously the best content on the field or on digital, it's a reminder that fans will pay for that. Now it's hard to do. And I think Mr. Kroenke is to credit for building what he built. That is the foundation for that experience out here. But that's certainly a trend as you look to the future, is knowing that there's many subsets of consumers and brands that will pay for something that really is different and special. And that, you see the NFL always pushing the envelope, and you see lots of owners thinking about how do you create that in the physical context with a venue or a game day experience. But it was fun to see that all come to fruition, and you couldn't imagine a better script for Mr. Kroenke and the Rams and the NFL out here in LA.
No doubt. I was talking to a client a couple weeks ago, and he said something to me that I've since written down and used multiple times. So I'll use it again here, which is he made the comment of people overestimate what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can do in 10. So I'll pose the question to this group as getting back to sort of the globalization. As you think about 10 years from now, and you think about the globalization, just where you sit in the world, and you think about your global strategy, you think about your international strategy and where you're trying to go. 10 years from now, what does success look like for you? Sina.
Just a real simple, easy question, right? I think, the quick and honest answer is, we'd like to be the default place that people think of when they think about investing in digital assets. We want them to think of FTX. When they think about whether it's crypto, NFTs, or really trading of any sort, or investing, we would love them to think of FTX first. So that's kind of the big picture. Like, that's what we're driving toward. More sort of tactically, I think that NFTs are probably going to be an even bigger thing on people's minds as we go out there. And so, how can we sort of plant our stake more firmly in the ground there, and get more people to realize that we have what we think is a pretty compelling NFT offering. So we'll need to play that out. And then, sort of beyond that, I would say that it's important to be flexible. Because, as we've seen in the crypto industry, things move extremely quickly. And then I think that's just true globally. Things are accelerating. So what I'm really trying to say is, in the same way that when, the internet or the World Wide Web first came out, and people started to use it in 1993, 1994, or whatever it was, I don't think people would have anticipated having your social network, having your banking, having your purchases, having your just entertainment, film, whatever you want to do, 90% of it, 95% of it, you could do online. I don't think anyone, I certainly wouldn't have, expected that in 1993, 1994. And yet it happened, and look how all encompassing it is today. So I think if you got in 93, 94, if you got locked into a certain path, unless you chose the exact right path, it could have been problematic. So I think it's important to be flexible. And as my old college football coach used to say, you got to read on the move. You're going, you think you got one thing going, but if your opponent makes a move, you got to move the other way. So I think it's important. The number one thing that I would say is, from our perspective, is probably to be able to, be flexible and be responsive to the environment, and also have some sense of where you think things are going, and try to be approximately right, and then adjust as needed.
I was going to say, I think the NBA, I'll answer from a league perspective, certainly a global sport, and has done a really nice job at seeding in a bunch of different markets. The players come from all over the globe. I think as travel becomes faster and easier, could we further globalize the sport, physically, where we play? Sure. But I think the big frontier is going to be direct to consumer. How do we continue to evolve that, and the connectivity with the fan, and provide experiences for them that make them feel like they're there, or have some sort of connection to it if they're not physically at the game, particularly for an international audience.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick on ours, and it kind of play off both the comments that have already been made. Because you can go 1,000 directions with this, right? When we talk 10 years, but for us to kind of oversimplify it, I would say it's just for the face of the sport to have a more global appearance, right? So if you look at NASCAR 10 plus years ago, and we use this example all the time, if you looked at NASCAR 10 plus years ago, everyone would have looked at this and said it's a very Southeast driven sport. Most of your drivers are from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. We took a concerted effort to say we're going to expand to California, to Chicago, to places like that. And what we see now is the highest number of drivers in our Cup Series right now are from California, and there's very few from North Carolina. So we take that approach and say, in 10 years from now, if we're all watching the Daytona 500, and you see a driver base and a fan base that is consistent of Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and so forth. So that's obviously a big one for us to look at it.
It's a good point, Chad, because as we all think about having a global business, right? I think what we've historically kind of looked at, and certainly I guess on a team level, your employee base should very much resemble the community that you're trying to do business with and you are trying to reach, right? If you look very different than them, that's problematic. So as we think about creating a global business, I would sort of then expand on that to say, well, then you as the organization need to also look and act like that global community. And if you don't, again, if you have a very Americana point of view, but you are trying to do business globally, I think, again, likely problematic.
Nope, I would agree. And then the only other comment I'd playing off the comment about taking the product to the fans. I mean, look, your question, you fielded the question, or you laid the question up perfectly of like, no limits, what's it look like in 10 years? And we've talked about that. Like, how do we in 10 years have a fan sit virtually and race in the Daytona 500, our biggest event of the year, right? And we've all talked about things like that. How is someone going to field a punt in an NFL game as a fan sitting in their living room? So there's a lot of things that probably seem far out there, but look at what we would have said 10 years ago was far out there and where we're at today.
Yeah, I would say
Chad, you could incorporate a right turn. I think you could do it.
We're starting to like, hey, we put a venue in a football stadium this year, so we're making progress.
Right on. Very cool. I'm gonna like plead the fifth to some extent, kids. I think it's super hard to look out 10 years. I mean, I guess there's two things that jump to mind when you ask that question. You know, and Cena kind of said this, go back to 2012. You just couldn't have predicted so many things about where we sit today, right? Consumer habits and the way business works. But I think we can predict that to some extent, like the world's getting smaller. So I think in 10 years, whether that's the social and digital space, as Chad just kind of said, or it's how, you know, in the tangible world, like how a consumer may choose to interact with sport. I think they're going to be much more diverse and interact with lots of different kinds of entertainment. I think we're going to travel differently in 10 years. I think there's going to be a chance to travel on a plane that goes way faster and allows you to get to something much more efficiently. We touched on globalization of sport and sports like rugby and cricket that are huge elsewhere that aren't necessarily huge in the States. I think that's going to happen in 10 years and vice versa. We're seeing those trends. And then Neo talked about the NFL, and the NFL will be a much more global sport in 10 years. So I would just say we're making sure that we're following, you know, where brands are going. We're following where customers and owners are going. And I think the world's getting a lot smaller. And this notion of certainly there are physical borders, but I think from a live entertainment perspective, borders are going to come down more and more over 10 years.
Yeah.
This question was kind of made for you in some regard, in the sense that Legends made a 10-year bet on the Olympics, right? And so you guys, I mean, of anybody, you actually had to look 10 years down the road to the extent you could, which
Sure.
So by you saying really hard to do, I would sort of agree with you, right? But you guys had to look and say 10 years from now, we want to put on an Olympic Games in LA. What is that going to look like? And I think you've been marching towards it. And you still got what, 6 more years?
6 years, yeah.
But that's you're living it, right? That's a hard thing to do, to sort of look 10 years down the road to go, this is what it's going to look like.
Actually, just look through that lens for a second, and I would say we're proud of everybody that we support and all of our clients. But, you know, Kathy Carter and Casey Wasserman and Chris Pepe, all the folks at the USOPP, I mean, there's not a better property, right? And I'm a little bit biased, of course, but in terms of like just patriotism and how we think about the Olympic movement, it's not a sport, it's a movement. But you could have never forecasted, go back, you know, just 4 years. And we think, by the way, the next 6 years are going to be just incredible in terms of the Olympic movement on a global basis. Paris, you know, Milan in Northern Italy, and then, of course, Los Angeles and back in the States in 28. But you could have never predicted that there was going to be 2 games in Asia, but they were going to be 11 months apart with no fans during COVID, right? Like what a really challenging time that they've gone through. So, but just in terms of the Olympics, yeah, there's not a better story. Brands are super excited, and the go forward look at, you know, how the Olympic story is told, not just every 4 years, because the Paralympics are a real thing and there's content and championships, and the NGBs do a great job. There's content every day, every week. But having those tent poles of Paris in the summer of 24, and then Milan, Northern Italy in the winter of 26, and then LA in 28. I think that Los Angeles hosting, actually not just Los Angeles, Southern California and our country hosting the Olympics, the Summer Games, might be the biggest live entertainment event in history. So super excited about that.
I just add, I think everybody had great points, which I completely agree with, especially just the need to be flexible. I think, Mike, as you kicked it off at the beginning, we don't have a crystal ball, but there are certain things that we do know are coming and are going to impact us. Blockchain is here, Web 3.0 is coming, 5G is here. All of those things interacting together, I think we are really taking the approach that we have to be, even more than we have been in the past, willing to test and learn. And really building partnerships so that we understand what's going on in these spaces. And everything we do isn't necessarily going to be successful. We hope it is, but we have to be okay with kind of some trial and error as we go forth. And just we're doing a lot more testing than we ever have. Like what we're doing with Roblox, we just signed a partnership for a virtual reality game. We signed a partnership on a blockchain based game as well. So we don't know where everything is going to go, but between AI and machine learning layered on top of this, just as much as we can build partnerships and get a little taste of what this new world is going to look like, the better we'll be set up at 10 years down the road when things are truly coming to fruition and we see where things are getting extremely sticky with our customers.
That is that's well said, and really well said, and I think layers in perfectly, Aneo, to our sort of last kind of talk track, which is really sort of about like how do we look at these new sets of challenges, but I would argue, right, new sets of opportunities. And if I could set the table simply to say, over the last 5 years, where we saw cloud technology really just change all of our businesses. Right. If you look at the investment in sport coming from cloud pre 5 years ago versus now, it's immense. Maybe only followed by the eruption of the evolution of fantasy gaming into sports betting, which again, for all of us, has changed the game completely. And again, just a huge influx, right, of not only dollars, but through that comes an influx of engagement. And then obviously, maybe the most disruptive of them all is crypto. Looking at you, Sina, the explosion of crypto, again, maybe as disruptive as anything. I mean, you not only disrupted sort of the sports industry, but you disrupted hundreds and hundreds of year-old finance institutions and foundation, which is bananas, and kudos to you. I mean, if you just look at the NBA alone, you have 2 naming rights deals, you have multiple badge deals, and it's now like a top 5 category, if you will, and it wasn't even a sector. Like, again, I would say like a couple years ago in terms of our industry. So I guess I would sort of pose the question to you all. First, Sina, I would love for you to sort of just comment on the creation of a sector within our world, which is unbelievable. You took everybody by storm. But as you think about from your lens, Sina, how you what's next, right? How does crypto sort of continue to play even a bigger role? And then I would say for the rest of us, what are you watching, right? Certainly we're all watching crypto. Certainly we're all watching fintech, various forms of 3.0, blockchain, sustainability. I mean, you can keep autonomous, you can keep going on and on and on and on. But I guess the question is like, what, Sina again talked about sort of how you disrupted everything. And then everybody else sort of comment on like, here's what we're looking at. Here's what we think is that next explosion, if you will. And again, that is asking you to have a crystal ball a little bit, but let's kick it with Sina, and then Sina, you can kick the rest of the group.
Sure. So I mean, really, we have to give credit where it's due, and it's in the case of FTX, it's really with our leadership. Sam Bankman-Fried, our CEO, Brett Harrison, our U.S. president, basically understanding that there's power in sport. And okay, so then what do we do with that? And really, the question that was posed by Sam, our CEO, was, hey, do you think we can get like some athletes to talk about their experience using FTX maybe like once a month or something like that. Can we do something with sports? And that was it. That was the prompt. And then myself and a number of my colleagues, we kind of took the ball and ran with it and said, okay, well, there's something here. And the more that we talked about it, the more that we researched and talked to, partners and prospective partners, we realized that the Venn diagram of like sports fans and then investment and crypto and trading fans is pretty attractive. And so we decided to jump in with both feet. And it's been, just phenomenal for us, both tangibly and intangibly. And the biggest thing that I won't bore you with the numbers there, but I will say that the trust factor has been probably the most interesting thing that I've noticed, and the sort of familiarity when we'll walk into a meeting with a top 20 asset manager globally. I mean, some of the biggest pockets of capital in the world, and the first thing out of their mouth will be, "We love that Tom Brady commercial," or we love seeing you, in some of the stuff you're doing with the Warriors and so forth. So there are lots of sort of ancillary benefits to being in sports in addition to just the raw numbers. Where do we go from here? I suspect that there's a lot that you can do with the technology that sort of underlies like a lot of these digital assets when it comes to the sports world. For example, ticketing. Obviously, there's really no need to have physical paper tickets anymore if you don't want to. You can have them digitally. Now, what if you make those into NFTs and you make them into collectibles, and all of a sudden, fans can start to collect the tickets that they've been to at their favorite Pistons game, at their favorite, NASCAR event, at their, wherever, right? And really start to display that as sort of like a badge of honor, like just like a cool thing that you'd show off to your friends, except now you can do it globally, digitally, 24/7. And then what if you take those NFTs and you say, it'll open up another experience that you can only get if you have these 2 NFTs, right? And on and on. And what if, by the way, if you buy your ticket as an NFT, you get into the event sooner, or you get preferential, seating, or some other, sweetener for the deal, right? So there's NFTs. There's payments, right? I mean, people can pay for their tickets in crypto as crypto becomes a bigger thing. I suspect people will want to pay for tickets in crypto, and maybe they get some, again, some benefit. Maybe they get a discount. Maybe they get a free T-shirt if they buy it in crypto. And then a number of other things that, we sort of can't even anticipate yet. But I suspect you'll see it get more and more involved in the sports world. And then, beyond that, then it gets a little bit esoteric. Like, I mean, you can start to talk about like people's identities, right? I mean, in the case of NFTs, I'll give the example of cookies on the World Wide Web, right? So right now, any of us, we go and we search whatever on the web, it'll probably plant a cookie on your computer, and websites that you go to will use those cookies to say, okay, this is Neneo. We think he likes, I don't know, sports and shoes, let's say, men's shoes. So then they have some idea, and they market to Neneo in a way that they think is accurate. Well, that means that they are monetizing Neneo's eyeballs, right? Now, what if we could say, you know what, Neneo could have these 3 NFTs that only he has, and with that, we verify his identity. And by the way, that means that Neneo now owns his own identity, and he can monetize his own identity with these NFTs. In other words, you go to a website, the website will ask you, do you want to verify yourself? And you say, yeah, here's my 3 NFTs. I just proved that I'm Neneo. And then the website can interact with you accordingly. We just turned Neneo into the monetizer of his own eyeballs. And these are the types of things that can happen. And then, hopefully even more exciting stuff beyond that. But, big sort of seismic things that we hope will certainly come to fruition.
I would say, Sina, I'm going to leave a cookie for you. We have a lot of people that like crypto here in Detroit. So whenever you want to have a conversation, just let me know. I think, there's been an emergence of a lot of new categories. We talked obviously about crypto. Sports betting obviously has been quite lucrative for everybody. I think the next big one will be the CBD marijuana space, depending upon how that plays out across the different leagues. But, it's legal here in Michigan. It's a very big business. And I think ultimately, once they figure everything out, that'll be the next frontier, I think, for a lot of us.
I'll add something, Mr. Kitts. And this is, I guess, the holistic thought is, as we look to the future, I think brands want to start investing a lot more in thoughtful programs. We've talked a lot about content and digital content, and not necessarily the tangible stuff. And listen, there's always going to be a place for the tangible assets or the spot transactions or even the brand signage. But, give me a program that's meaningful to my audience or my target audience. And we haven't really talked today about, diversity and equity and inclusion and thinking about the importance of women's sport. We're going to do something and announce something later on this summer with a really forward-thinking brand and a terrific client that revolves around women's sport and supporting that. So it's not just about that, but it's about holistically. I think the onus is on all of us to build programs and content that is custom to the audience we're trying to reach and supports a brand's objectives, and not try and do the reverse and fit everybody into the venue or the track or whatever that we've all built. So we see that every single day from brands. Sometimes that's our responsibility to build it or push our clients to build it and respond to them. But I think all things DEI, there's so much that we could all be doing better. And I think there's a chance to build content and programs, not just about that, but things that are not tangible. So that's something that from a trend perspective, we're certainly keeping our eye on.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of that one because that was one for me too. It's from a CSR standpoint. I think we all work for great teams, properties, leagues, and know that we're going to be able to sell against impressions and that association. But I think more and more, and this is not a new trend, but we're being asked why, and why by the consumer. Why they want to know, why is there a connection? Why do you have this relationship with this sports team other than they have tons of fandom and that I'm going to see your signage in their arena, stadium, on their social channels? And so it's really storytelling, and I think that's one thing that has been accelerated during the pandemic. Really, storytelling, understand what people stand for, what brands stand for, and how a brand and an organization can come together to really provide value. I think we're all in the business of providing value, and the more we dive into that, more from more than a dollars and cents perspective, the more that will get traction with not only our clients, but with the consumers and fans out there as well.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in, close out from my side is we have the one unique one that probably most properties don't have to deal with. We have that shared common partner, which is your sponsors, your broadcast, your media partners, and your fans. I mean, daily, we're watching very closely what's happening in the automobile industry, right? It's core to who we are, right? The way people, whether it's through fuel or whether it's through electrification and just the way consumers engage with their automobile, we like to believe that we're positioned to help the automobile industry more so than any other property at that, because at the root, that's who we are, right? We have that close relationship. So the automobile industry and the consumers' engagement and what they do with their vehicles is something we're watching closely from our side.
It's well said, Chad. Well, I will bring us all home and just to say thank you to each of you with the insights. I think not sure whether or not we truly used a crystal ball, but I certainly had some really strong nuggets that I'm taking away, and I think we're all poised to solve everybody else's problems and none of our own. But that's the way of the world. Appreciate all of you. I look forward to seeing all of you soon. And with that, the crystal ball battle.
Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure.